Alara moved through the city like a flame cupped against the wind, bright, careful, unwilling to go out. She was young enough to believe in late-night promises, old enough to hide how much they cost. Finn floated beside that flame, thin and watchful, a boy whose laughter arrived rarely but fully, like rain in drought. Their bond felt ancestral, as if she had been born already reaching for his hand. When fear prowled their rooms, it was Alara who faced it first, shoulders squared, voice steady. Illness entered quietly, a new vocabulary puncturing soft routines. The specialist's tone was professionally calm, the words not. Rare and relentless, he said, the kind that makes time a ledger. There was an experimental protocol abroad, a slim door in a long hallway, and the handle was made of money. Alara took every shift no one wanted. She stacked boxes until her palms burned, ladled soup in a night shelter, taught scales to children whose parents counted on her patience. Her conservatory application gathered dust. She learned to bargain with sleep, to measure hope by the hour, and to lie to Finn without lying to his eyes. Marcus appeared when the weeks began to blur. A family friend she barely remembered, now burnished by money and timing. He had the unhurried smile of a man who never queued, and a scent like cedar and clean paper. He remembered her mother's lullabies, remembered Alara as the girl who hummed while washing dishes, and he called Finn by his name on the first try. He offered to fund the treatment fully, insisted on it, brushed aside her protests as quaint. Flights were scheduled, consultations arranged, a miracle threaded with confirmations and signatures. Gratitude flooded her, shameless and grateful for a shore. Dependency crept in under the petals of kindness. Marcus hired a driver so she could rest, then frowned when she took the bus. He sent flowers with cards that called her brave, then asked why bravery looked so tired on her. He suggested she drop the soup kitchen, for optics. He introduced her to donors who praised her composure and later texted her late, asking if she was safe. Each favor was a loop. Each loop tightened. Alara told herself that debts could be paid, that generosity did not have a ledger. Yet she began to speak more softly around him. The first crack was thin as a hair. In a corridor outside his office, door resting on the latch, she heard Marcus speaking in a voice stripped of charm. He mentioned shipments, proxies, regulators who could be lulled if paperwork sang the right hymn. A laugh followed, quick and metallic. Alara stood very still, convinced meaning would shapeshift if she stared at it. She chose not to stare. Finn brightened in brief, glorious bursts. On one morning he whispered that the sky looked unfinished, as though someone had set down a brush to answer the door. Alara fed that image like a coal. Meanwhile, Marcus's attention began to feel like surveillance. He appeared at the clinic when she had not told him the time. He called past midnight and noted the tremor in her breath. The deception revealed itself as paper, bland and devastating. Searching for a lab report in his study, she found twins of invoices with different spines of numbers, and charitable foundations soft as lullabies shuttling money like a shell game. Finn's name unlocked every door in those pages. There were consent forms she never signed, authorizations she never saw, her signature rehearsed by a hand that had practiced. Transfers diverted into companies with no addresses, treatments billed for days when Finn had been home watching storms. A ledger whispered a sum large enough to buy time, siphoned into absence. The miracle, she understood, had been staged lighting. The cure was a pretext. She had been the prop. She confronted him. Marcus dropped the mask, coldly confirming everything, then promised Finn would stop breathing if she spoke again. She left his house with the taste of tin in her mouth, metallic as the laugh she had once ignored. The street kept its ordinary choreography, buses sighing, a cyclist humming past, the indifferent sun on rooftops. Alara moved through it like a shadow that remembered being warm. Gratitude, which had propped her days like a borrowed cane, snapped in two. Inside, everything collapsed without debris. The wreckage was private, silent. Finn woke to a new arithmetic of pain. The good hours shrank until they could be cupped like water that leaked between fingers. He slept in braced snatches. When she read to him, he let the words pass over his eyes, and she learned to gauge severity by the pressure of his teeth against his lip. The clinic began to stall, citing delays she recognized as missing money in a different suit. She told him it was a systems glitch, and watched her own reflection refuse to flinch. Silence became her choreography. She answered Marcus with obedient phrases and bowed shoulders. In public, he played benefactor, palm at her back, the pressure light and proprietary. Alone with her fear, she rehearsed the mask that suggested gratitude instead of terror. At night, she woke to the image of Finn struggling for air, and the panic was bright and clean, a blade that cut through any wish to be polite. She knew her compliance was feeding the knife he held to her brother's life. Under the bruise, a pilot light persisted. It spoke with Finn's language, the unfinished sky. The brush set down and never lifted again. Hope reorganized into intention. Obedience would not save him. Courtesy was a leash. She felt a calm she did not trust, the kind that arrives when a choice stops being a question. She began to harvest evidence in motion small enough to pass as tidying. She labeled folders, then copied them, saved them to an account built from a false middle name and a childhood street. She photographed calendars while an assistant fetched coffee. At the library, she sat at sticky terminals, forwarding emails to an empty inbox that felt like a new room inside her. With each layer, the rot showed itself. Charities laundering fear, suppliers quoting generosity for silence, procurement padded by donations to the right gala, shell companies nesting like dolls. There were shipping schedules that hummed with euphemism, invoices that changed numbers when no one looked, approvals stamped by people who never existed. The machine ate need and spat out influence. The more she learned, the clearer the outline of his empire became. Not grand, but efficient. A machine that ate need and spat out influence. She kept moving like a dancer counting beats, pretending nothing had changed, touching her phone as little as possible, answering with careful brevity. She waited for a mistake and saw only her own reflection, thinner and more intent. She found Ben again by accident, leaving the clinic through the side door to avoid the driver whose smile felt like a report. A man with a camera bag snagged his strap on the railing and swore softly, then steadied himself and looked up. Recognition clicked across his face. He said her name as if it might bruise. Once, after a gala, he had asked careful questions about Marcus, and she had deflected them with composed gratitude. Now his eyes carried a tired apology. They walked to the curb to unknot the awkwardness, the traffic fussing around them. She asked whether he still chased stories that ran faster than their tellers. He smiled without showing teeth and said, "Some stories chase back." The sentence struck her like a match in a damp room. She told him she could not talk. He did not push. He handed her a smudged card, said, "If you ever need someone to listen." Days later, after a night of fever, she messaged him and waited in a cafe that smelled of oranges and rain. Ben arrived wearing rain. He ordered tea he did not drink and let her speak fragments, dates, signatures that were hers when they were not. When she finished, he exhaled as if the table had shifted. "I tried once and they killed it," he said. "But we can try again. I'll help you. It will reach for anything you love." Alara held his gaze. The decision rooted. Ben turned their next meeting into a lesson disguised as a walk, tracing a route that doubled back on itself through wet streets and crowded arcades. He pointed out reflections in shop windows, how stories live in the edges where two surfaces meet. He showed her how to listen for patterns, the same black sedan appearing twice, a barista who stared too long, an email that arrived 1 minute earlier than any other day. He talked about metadata as if it were weather, invisible but always touching you, and about silence as a tool, not a void. She learned to hold questions in her mouth until the air around them shifted, to mark time not by minutes, but by changes in posture and tone. In the library again, he walked her through search warrants he'd never been granted, and the shadows of them he learned to cast alone. They drafted protocols that felt like rituals. A cheap phone with only 5 numbers, a habit of leaving it behind. A note that said nothing unless placed under a lamp that warmed the ink to speech. A bag lined to swallow signals. 3 places where they could sit without speaking and still have a conversation. A station platform at the quiet hour. A park bench with wind loud enough to erase. A food court that hummed like a beehive. She learned the etiquette of the clandestine. How not to flinch when a plan required waiting inside uncertainty long enough for it to recognize her. The work threatened to split her into pieces. She woke with guilt slick on her skin and went to sleep with it hardened like a shell. On good days, she lifted it and found breath underneath. On bad days, it fused to her ribs. She thought about harm as a river, where redirecting the current meant deciding whose fields would flood. If she failed, Finn would pay. If she succeeded, others might drown before the tide went out. She held his sketchbook to her face and inhaled the dust of places neither of them had reached. When her resolve shook, she counted the ways Marcus had measured their lives in decimals and decided she would resist by refusing to be reduced. She returned to rooms she had left, careful to seem like someone clinging to gratitude. At a benefit where the champagne tasted of soft metals, she let familiar hands rest too long on her elbow. She asked after initiatives with the practiced curiosity of a donor's companion. She tilted her head the way she used to when she was trying to believe. She collected lanyards left on chairs, menus that listed sponsors, careless jokes that revealed the shape of internal memos. To a compliance officer who preferred gossip to policy, she murmured that an external review might be wise. The seed did not need to grow, only to search for light in the right corner. Over lunch with a junior assistant whose hunger bent toward promotion, Alara offered nothing that could be quoted, only warmth that could be remembered. She praised diligence, admired how the assistant managed shipment calendars, and noted aloud how generous it was that deliveries always arrived when oversight was thin. The assistant corrected her with pride, naming a warehouse and a code that sounded like a lullaby and a siren. They found David through a ledger that smiled wrong. On paper, he was procurement. In person, he was loyalty with a limp. Marcus had promised a bonus and given him a warning, then a demotion when he questioned the math. In a laundromat where all the machines were occupied by quiet, he folded their conversation between towels. He spoke first of inconvenience, then of principle, then of a friend who had been made to sign away liability for a shipment that never existed. Alara did not sell him hope. She offered him a chance to tell his own story. He chose to become a hinge. Close calls became their own calendar. An elevator that should have been empty opened onto a guard adjusting his tie. Alara's breath stopped mid-syllable. A visitor's pass belched red at a turnstile, and she laughed as if she had forgotten her own last name, turning back as though that had always been the plan. The driver with a smile like a report appeared outside the clinic, and she waved with a familiarity she did not feel, walking the long way round the block until the pins and needles in her legs filed into submission. A camera panned lazily across a lobby just as she tucked a memory card into the hem of her coat. She later unpicked the seam with shaking fingers and found the card precisely where her terror had left it. The plan coalesced the way frost does, filigree building upon filigree until a pane held a pattern. David's documents named a transaction dressed as mercy. A vast order of diagnostic equipment through a Foundation subsidiary, priced like a prayer and routed through a trust on an island that existed mostly in brochures. The timeline synchronized with a gala, when attention would look one way while money took another door. Ben mapped the bank corridors the funds would run, the shell entities that would meet them with handshakes and aliases. They would need signatures, timestamps, a location pin on a device that should never leave a pocket, a confession made not to a person, but to power itself. Finn woke into a clearing one afternoon and found her hand. His lips formed her name like a secret he needed help carrying. He seemed lighter and smaller at once, the way rooms look when furniture is removed. For one long minute, the world simplified itself to a pulse beneath his skin. Alara pressed her forehead to his and promised she would not be late, though she did not say for what. When he slept again, she let the grief come without a timer, and then put it away as carefully as a relic. David's text arrived on their quiet line as evening thinned. He had the loading bay, the hour, the intermediary's alias, the bank that would open its mouth. He also had a warning folded into the details. Someone inside had whispered of a leak. Marcus had asked for phones to be audited and for eyes to be everywhere they had forgotten eyes could be. The door they had built was open, but it had been lined with blades. Night gathered like ash on the eve of the operation, and Alara measured her breath against the metronome of the clock. The room smelled faintly of solder and coffee, a nervous mix of heat and vigilance. Ben traced the plan once more, voice low, patience threaded through urgency. Precision was not a luxury, he reminded her. It was the difference between a clean cut and a wound that would not heal. She nodded without looking up, feeling the tremor in her hands and letting it be a fact, not a sentence. Finn's name moved through her like a tide, steadying and relentless. They built the trap with mundane things that could carry extraordinary weight. David secured the loading bay and the timing. Ben turned pointed suspicions into affidavits. The task force that arrived in plain clothes wore skepticism like armor, their questions clipped, their eyes counting the ways this could fail. Doubt shifted in the room. A captain asked for corroboration, and David's texts arrived with photos of crates stenciled with mercy. The warrants felt cool in her palms, paper colder than steel. She reached out to Marcus with words designed to scratch at his vanity, an apology crafted to taste of surrender. He replied almost immediately, a time in a penthouse suite, the promise of privacy, and his particular brand of tenderness. In the elevator, Alara adjusted the small pendant at her throat and thought of how easily jewelry could become a confession booth. The city seemed to hold its breath around her, as if every window had leaned in to listen. Marcus greeted her with an embrace that felt like a signature. He looked rested, rehearsed, and certain that the world would continue to bend where he pressed. He spoke first of forgiveness, of second chances, of gratitude she had forgotten how to show. She let him preen and fed him carefully measured trespasses. "If I had only understood," she murmured, "if I had accepted the terms, Finn would have been safe." The name was a hook. He could not resist tugging it. He smiled as if at a child and described almost indulgently how risk requires leverage, how love makes the cleanest leverage of all. He sketched the route money takes when it wants to be unseen, the island trust with its sand-white secrecy, the invoices that bloomed from air. He reminded her softly how quickly medicine could become a gate locked from the outside. "You did it because you could, because I would not speak." Each phrase coaxed another brick from his facade. When she asked what would happen to those who questioned him, his eyes flashed with the impatience of a man who mistakes fear for obedience. "Disappearances are a form of mercy," he said, and the word mercy traveled straight into the microphone and out into a waiting van. The signal came like a distant weather change. Boots lifted from quiet floors. The penthouse door swallowed a keycard and opened to a wedge of authority. At the loading bay, flashlights made quick constellations over crates. Serial numbers matched what the ledger had promised. Across town, the banker's handshake turned into handcuffs. Marcus heard the shift before he saw it. His smile died without ceremony. He moved with practiced economy, knocking over a table as if chaos could turn to fog. Glass broke with a small scream. Alara did not reach for him. She reached for the part of herself that did not shake. He ran for the service corridor, shedding charm like a coat. Alara followed on legs that belonged to a woman who had done this 1,000 times in her mind. The stairwell pinched their footsteps into echoes. In the garage, he found his car. She found the memory of Finn's pulse, and it became a compass. Ben's voice broke through the thud of her heart, warning, counting, pleading for patience. She ignored the plea and followed the taillights into Rain. Taillights led her to a dark, abandoned warehouse. Rain clung to the corrugated metal as Alara slid through the crooked door, the warehouse yawning like a ribcage. The air smelled of oil and wet cardboard. Somewhere a generator coughed and sank into a sullen hum. Footsteps tapped ahead, entitled. Marcus stepped from behind shrink-wrapped pallets, Rain tracing his jaw, eyes still bright with calculation. He lifted his hands, soothing the air. "You don't want this," he said. That old intimacy lacquered over his voice. "You want Finn safe. We can still fix that. I can still fix you." The name broke like glass. Her reply came low and steady. She spoke of nights spent counting pills, of Finn learning to breathe quietly because loud children waste oxygen, of hope doled out in tinctures. Words lit the dim, each one a flare. He only flinched when her pain turned reflective enough to show him his own face. "Leverage," she said, tasting the word. "You put a price tag on a heartbeat and called it strategy." His gaze narrowed to cutting edges. "You misunderstand necessity," he murmured, stepping closer, voice soft as silk. "I offered a path. You chose thorns. Come now, and this ends." Doors can open. Then the turn, as predictable as rain. Or I let those doors close on Ben, on anyone you've trained yourself to need. He moved first, a flick of metal at his belt. Her body answered faster. She knocked the tool aside. It skittered into darkness. The fight was not elegant. Pallets shuddered. Plastic wraps snapped. Concrete bit her knees. His weight bore down. Practiced, sure. She fought like a tide against pilings, relentless, gathering, and when her shoulder drove into his ribs, she felt the air fold inside him. They hit a railing that guarded a drop into the loading pit. Rust grated under their hands. Lights buzzed, moths bruising themselves against the housings. She pinned him there, palms burning through the slick of his coat. The pit below pooled shadow thick enough to swallow a name. He studied her as if citing a final card. "You aren't a killer," he whispered. Not mercy, but taunt. "You've been play-acting at hardness. Let me go, and I'll show you how to live with yourself." Her hands shook under the weight of the choice. The edge felt like an altar. Suffering had carved lessons into her. Payment had always been imagined as the precise coin of his fall. Then Finn's face, unguarded as morning, moved through her and gentled the serrations. Survival had taught her how to fight. Love had taught her when to stop. Sirens rose outside, petals of sound unfolding from the dark. Boots splashed through puddles, the blunt grammar of authority echoing off steel. Ben's voice came thin but urgent, threading the clatter, saying her name as if it might break. She stepped back, 1 inch, then another, lifting her hands. Marcus slid along the railing, trying to pivot past her. Hands closed on him from behind, officers turning restraint into choreography. Metal touched his wrists and clicked shut. His face emptied, pleading drained to hard light. They led him across the concrete. He angled his head and found her eyes. The look fastened there like a nail, cool as a coin placed under the tongue. No words, only a promise that he had built labyrinths before and could find roots through the rubble again. Ilara stood in the white glare of flashlights and learned in a clean, quiet instant that victory and safety are not synonyms. The tremor after the quake arrived, small and stubborn. Ben reached her, breath ragged, hands hovering at the edges of contact, not touching until she nodded. She felt the world reassemble by degrees, sirens fading to a wet electric hush, the storm not gone but changed. Outside, doors slammed, engines coughed alive. Inside, the pit held darkness like a secret she had chosen not to spend. She tasted iron and rain and knew the reckoning was a hinge, not an ending. Morning folded into morning, the warehouse shrinking to a bright smear in memory and a series of statements signed under fluorescent hum. Evidence bloomed in hard drives and shell companies, accounts frozen until their stillness sang of theft. Names surfaced, not as entries on ledgers, but as people who had shivered under Marcus's shadow. David gave his sworn statement with a steadiness that surprised him, and in its wake, he asked about his sister. And Ilara gave him a number for a counselor who would answer at midnight. Ben kept to her periphery like a lighthouse, throwing a circle of ordinary around moments that would otherwise tilt. In the courthouse, she felt the old ache of power staged as architecture. Darkwood tried to persuade the soul that it was safe to speak. She spoke anyway. The prosecutor's questions walked her through rooms she hoped never to revisit. The defense tried to turn her knees to sand. "You benefited," they said, and she held Finn in her chest like a lantern. "I survived," she answered, voice low but steady. Marcus watched with that cold coin light, measuring what he had miscounted. When the verdict landed, no sound escaped her, only a long breath that tasted less of iron and more of rain. His empire collapsed with the slow drama of scaffolding dismantled piece by piece, revealing sky where there had been threat. Stores of cash re-entered the world as scholarships, restitution funds, grants for clinics that smelled of lavender instead of bleach. Men who had smirked in private learned the shape of handcuffs. Women who had learned to be small entered rooms shoulder first, as if testing whether fate might be different now. It was not triumph that threaded through Ilara, but a sane, durable relief, tempered by the knowledge that labyrinths are built by many hands and must be unbuilt just as patiently. Finn's days lengthened by minutes, then hours. Without the constant static of fear, his body seemed to remember a simpler rhythm. He slept more deeply, woke without the bruised circles that had become his signature. His condition did not reverse. Some truths did not bargain, but there were afternoons in which his laughter arrived without coaxing, and mornings when his fingers traced the outline of a story she had read him long ago, and he said her name as if it were a place to sit down. Uncertainty remained, but the immediate cliff was no longer under their feet. Healing came in irregular stitches. Ilara learned the choreography of a life not lived on a fault line. She chose a therapist with warm eyes and an insistence on homework. She wrote letters she would never send and burned them in a ceramic bowl, washing the ash down the sink like absolution. The smell of wet concrete could still tilt the room, but she practiced breathing until the edges blurred. She cooked simple food, watched steam ghost from a pot, and taught herself to eat without counting exits in the spoon's curve. Nightmares visited, then thinned. Dawn became less of a gauntlet, more of a threshold. Purpose crept in on practical feet. She sat in waiting rooms beside strangers and translated bureaucracy into sentences that could be lived with. She learned to recognize the weary swivel of a person's eyes when they are scanning for danger, and met that glance with a list of choices and a promise to stay. She partnered with advocates who had the patience of Tide, with lawyers who understood that silence can be a strategy before it is a wound. She taught small, careful classes. How to document coercion without becoming a diary of pain. How to speak to a reporter and still keep a piece of yourself. She named the project for Finn's habit of tapping once for yes, once for no, a rhythm that meant he was here. Ben became a reliable horizon. They met for coffee that went cold while stories unraveled, or for walks that refused conclusion. He had a talent for showing up with exactly the right small thing, a flashlight when the building's power flickered, a joke when court transcripts turned the air brittle, a silence that allowed grief to tell the truth. He did not try to rescue her from a past she had already crossed. He simply kept watch while she built what came next. The scars remained. A thin white seam on her knuckle caught the light when she reached for Finn's hand. There were days when the sound of moths scattering against a bulb pulled her back to the railing, to the choice that had remade her. She did not try to disinfect memory. She learned instead to shelve it, to take it down when it could instruct and tuck it away when it tried to command. The echo inside her changed key. She stood on stages she never meant to mount, her voice steadier than her knees. In community halls and policy briefings, she spoke about thresholds and return. People who have been through too much, she said, learn to read rooms the way sailors read weather. We are not brittle. We are jointed. We know where the exits are, and we know how to guide others to them. She did not varnish the cost, but she offered a map. On an evening rinsed clean by rain, she came home to find Finn awake, wide-eyed, the window open to a narrow band of horizon. They watched a distant plane stitch a white line across the sky, then watched the line dissolve. The future did not arrive with fanfare. It unfolded, patient as tide. She rested her palm on the cool windowsill and felt the thrum of a life that would keep asking for courage and keep finding it. The echoes within her answered, not as alarms but as a beacon, and she let their light scatter ahead.